click on it again, it'll flip back and show me the ace of clubs again, back and forth, okay? And your homework is going to be to make it so when the card flips up, it doesn't show the ace of club, it shows a random card drawn from the deck. Okay? That's going to be your entire homework that's due on Monday. Okay, so let's do this. Really simple. We go to this area right here, this object library. Okay, that's the third button over here, show object library. And this is where all our objects are. If you look in here and you don't see these objects, it might be worth clicking on your view. Sometimes Xcode wants to know what the destination is that you're going to be dragging things into. So if you click on it, then you'll see these things. And we're just going to grab one of these buttons right here. So I'm just going to pick this button up and drag it out. And notice as I drag it out, these little blue lines appear, these guidelines. Okay, these guidelines are super important. They seem just like, oh, a convenience for helping you put it right in the middle or right in the right-hand corner. And they are, but they're really important for making sure that all the things in your view are kind of like standard space apart, right, and lined up against edges, so that as the users go from one app to another, things will all be separated by predictable spaces and everything will be consistent. It's really important. And there's a mechanism, you can see this switch right here, use auto layout, which is introduced in iOS 6 and vastly improved in iOS 7, especially in Xcode, that allows when your user interface changes size, like it goes from being an iPhone 4 to an iPhone 5, or it rotates from being vertical to being horizontal, or it's on an iPad in a bigger space, for all the buttons and everything to kind of move to a new position that makes sense, or at least most of them, right? And then maybe you might have to move a few of them by hand, depending on what's going on, but it mostly automatically lays it out. And this is really important because I'm sure devices will continue to be differing sizes as new devices come out over the years. So doing auto layout is important, and these blue guidelines are the #1 most important thing for auto layout. We're going to cover auto layout in detail, and there's a lot to it. All these buttons down here have to do with auto layout, but getting those blue guidelines, making sure you drop things with at least one blue guideline somewhere is really important to kind of get you going down the right path with a properly auto laid out UI. So we have this button here, but before, and of course, we can go over here to this, is the attributes inspector, and click on it, and we'll see all kinds of attributes. In fact, if I hide this, tons and tons of attributes for this button. Okay? Not just the button itself, but actually its superclass has attributes. Control is its superclass. And then view is control superclass, and it has attributes. Okay, so this is an object-oriented inspector that will show all the attributes of all the things through the inheritance hierarchy. And what's happening here is we're actually editing an instance of the button here. So we are not, and I know in some systems you lay out the button, you set the size, and you set the attributes, and then behind the scenes a bunch of code is being generated to create the button. That's not what we're doing here. We're actually editing live objects. They're essentially going to be freeze-dried, and then when your app runs, add water, they come to life, okay, with all their attributes set and all their sizes and positions and all their auto layout information in the object, okay? So it's a little different than you might be used to in some other systems. So anyway, before we edit the attributes of this button, though, let's change our background, because this is a card game, and most card games are on like green felt, right? So let's make our background be more like a green felt. So I'm just going to click on the background, which is this view right here, and you can see its properties. So I'm going to change a couple, or just one of its properties, which is the background. You see this background white color right here? So if I click on this, I have some recently used colors. I have all these kind of black and white colors, and I also have other. And if I bring up other, it brings up the crayons, okay? It also brings up other ways to choose colors, but I like the crayons, okay? And so, where are my crayons? There they are. So let's pick a green, like moss is a good green, clover. I kind of like moss better. So that's kind of a card game background. And that's it. So we've set the background color of our views, okay? And all the attribute setting is just like this. You just set it and, set it and forget it. So let's go back to the button and its properties. Okay, the button I want to look like a card. Well, a button in iOS 7 basically looks a lot like a hyperlink on a web page, just like that button does right there, okay? That blue button. That's not really appropriate for what we want. We want it to look like a card with a little rounded rect and a white background, right? And then we want the back of the card to look the same but have some kind of design on it or something like that. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to set a background image for my button. Okay, a background image is like a rounded rect. So let's take a little aside here and talk about how do we get images into our app. Okay, we want to use images in our app. It's very common to want to use images in a graphical application like on a phone. So how do you do it? And the answer is you go down here to this place called the image asset library, images.xc assets, that's Xcode assets. And you can see there's already a couple of slots for icons here. They're not set, but this is the app icon. And also you can have a launch image that will appear instantly when someone launches your app, and then as you're initializing, happening behind the launch image, and then it'll show your actual UI. So it's kind of quick launch image. And we'll talk about this on Monday. We'll set the app icon for Machismo here. But I'm going to actually drag in some other image. So I have some images here. And for example, I've got this Stanford logo right here. So I'm going to drag that Stanford logo in, because I want to use it, and that's it. You just drag it in here. It says Stanford. But notice that it kind of has this weird thing here, this 1x and 2x. You see that? And that's because every image that you're going to use on in iOS wants to have a normal resolution version that's going to be used like on the iPhone 4, non-retina displays basically, and then a 2x, twice as high resolution one that will be used on retina. And it'll automatically pick the right one depending on what you're running on. Okay? You don't have to do anything about it, but you do want to provide these higher res ones. And these higher res ones aren't just necessarily the same exact image, just, you know, made more high resolution. They might allow you to do, for example, here I got a Stanford logo with the little tree. See the tree in there? So maybe this is too low resolution to really get a good looking tree, but I can get the tree in at a higher resolution, so I put it in there. So it's not that common that the two ones would be actually different looking, but they could be. It's certainly allowed they could be. I also don't want to really call this Stanford. I'm going to use this as my back of card. Instead of having, you know, some kind of design, I'm going to have the Stanford logo be the back of my card. When my card's flipped down, I see the back, I'm going to see a Stanford logo. So I'm going to call this card back. Okay, because that's, I can call it anything I want. I also have things for the front here. This one right here. This is blank card with a rounded corner. There it is. Oh, you can't see. It's white because it's a white card, so you can't see it. But I'm going to use that. I'm going to call this one card front, and I also have a high res version of that as well. Okay, so looks good. So as much as we can see of it. Okay, so now I got some images, and now I want to use them in my view. I want to set this card to use them. So I'm going to start with my card here being face up when it runs. When my app runs, the card is going to start face up. In your app, when you get your homework, you're probably going to want to start it face down. The reason for that is my app only shows one card, ace of clubs. So it's fine if it comes up with ace of clubs. But you don't want your card to come up ace of clubs for sure. And it might be a little more work for you, coding-wise, to initialize it to come up with some random card. So just have it come up face down. Make it a lot easier on you. Okay? So how do we set that? Really simple. I've got the button selected here. Here's its properties. One of its properties is its background image. Okay? So I'm just going to click here, and you can see that all images that are in my assets library would be here. Okay? And if there was a really lot of them, you can type and it'll match it. So I'm going to make it be the card front. So it made it the card front, but I don't see where's the rounded rect? Okay? I can't see the rounded rect, and that's because it's too small to see the rounded corners very well here. So you can just take this thing and resize it. Okay? And I'm going to make it, I want it to be about a 2 to 3 aspect ratio. So I'm going to make it 64 by 96. I know this happens to be a very good size. And I've resized it. Now you can see the little rounded corners, you see? So this is that image I dragged in with button written on top of it. And of course, I moved it a little so I can put it back in the middle using my blue guidelines, right? And of course, I don't want my card to say button on it. I want the ace of clubs on here. So I'm going to just double click on it. I could also edit that up here. You see right here where it says button? I could click it here. But I'm just going to double click directly on it. I'm going to type ace. And how do I type clubs? Anyone know? Alt something or other. I like to do it this way. I go to the edit menu, special characters. You get this magic thing. You ever seen this? Kind of cool. You just double click. Find the clubs and double click. All right, so there's my ace of clubs. Yeah, but you know, that's not quite right either. I don't really like that blue A. I really want the A to be black. And it could be a little bigger. There's more room for it. So I can go over here, for example, and change the font. I can change it by clicking this little thing to make it bigger. Or I can actually click on this T and even set which font it is. One thing that's really important in iOS 7 is the typography. Okay? Picking the right text styles is really, really important in iOS 7, and we're not going to really talk about it here. We're just going to use the system font, but that's something we'll talk about in lecture, is making sure you pick the right font in the right places to make the UI look really nice. I can change the size here, maybe 24 point or something like that. That'll still fit. And then I don't want this blue, so that's this text color, so let's go ahead and make that black. All right, so I got the card looking the way I want. That's good. All these properties that we're setting, by the way, if you look at button, you see this state config right here, default. We can actually set all these things differently for the highlighted state of the button, or a selected state, or disabled state, but we're setting these as the default. So all our buttons are always going to be displaying the default state. Okay? So buttons are pretty powerful. You can have them look different as they highlight or whatever, but we're all going to be working all in what's called the normal or default state of the button. You'll see that in when we get to the code. So we can actually run this right now. So running, you've all most again done Xcode. You know how to run. It's this little play button. You can actually hold it down, and there's other things you can do like test and analyze. But we're just going to run. So I click run, and it's going to run this in a simulator. Okay? And here it is. And you can see that the simulator is so big it doesn't even fit on my screen, so I kind of have to scroll around in it. And when I click it, it doesn't do anything. Okay? So that's not good, right? Because I haven't put any code in my controller to respond to that thing being touched. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's go back here and stop. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty interesting how we do that, actually. I'm going to make some more space here. And what we need to do is connect up to our controller. And we do that by putting our controller's code side by side with our view. All right? So I'm going to click this little button right here, this butler icon, and that puts side by side. And by default, if you have a view up here on the left, it's going to put that controller's code on the right. And you can move this to get more space for the code if you want. You can also switch between the header if you want to do public stuff or the implementation. Okay? So that's good. Now, this code right here is part of the view controller lifecycle, which we're going to talk about in 2 or 3 weeks. But today, we're not going to talk about it, so we can just get rid of it. And let's just start by saying when this button gets touched, we want it to flip over. So we need to make a connection between our view and the controller. And we're going to do that thing where we hang the target out and shoot the arrow, okay, called target action. And this is going to be kind of wacky. You're probably not even going to believe this when you see it. The way to do this is you hold down the control key. So I'm holding down the control key, and I'm dragging a line from the view directly into our code. Okay? And then I let go. And it says, oh, you want a connection between your view and your controller, do you? Here's what I need to know. So it's asking us, what do you want to call this connection? So this is going to be the name of the method. It's actually going to create a method here that gets called when the button gets touched. I'm going to call it touch card button. That's a good name. Here it's saying, what do you want the type of the argument to be? We'll talk about this later, but for now, we obviously want the argument to be the button that is sending us this action, okay? Which is going to be nice because then we're going to talk back to it and tell it to flip itself over. There's other things we can set here, like what kind of event do you want to send this action. And you can actually set it so there's no argument. It just sends touch card button with no arguments. But here we want it to have the argument of the sender, the button sending this message. You can even send the touch event along, but we almost never do that, like 0.1% of the time. So here I'm going to have the sender. So when I click connect, it creates a new method. And that method is wired up to that button. In fact, you see this little round circle? If I mouse over it, it'll show you that's what it's connected to. Okay? So this is just a pretty normal looking method right here. The return type, IB action, that's actually typedef void. This method actually returns void. The reason that Xcode puts IB action there and typedef's IB action to void is just so that it can tell which methods are target action, so that it can do stuff like this, okay, the mouse over. But the compiler ignores